Well, thanks so much for joining us. I'm Jonathan Armstrong at my new home at Punter, Southall Law, but I'm pleased to say that my old podcast compadre is still here, Eric Sinrod. You're with Dwayne Morris in California, and Eric, social media's on your mind.
It's on a lot of our minds. That's true. And nice to see you, Jonathan, and welcome to your new locale, shall we say. And I remain at Dwayne Morris. Yes, so here in the US, we have a Surgeon General who's the top medical official for our federal government, and his name is Vivek Murthy. And he recently called for warning labels on social media. He notes in particular that children who spend significant time on social media, believe it or not, or maybe we do believe it, are at risk for mental illness. And he concludes, quote, "The moral test of any society is how well it protects our children," close quote. So how do we protect our children in this new social media age? Murthy recognizes properly that a warning label is a simple solution, Jonathan, to a very complex problem. And a couple of weeks ago, his office issued a more detailed report noting that schools, parents, policymakers, and technology companies all have a role to play in protecting kids in this relatively new environment. And of course, a really long-term solution, I believe strongly, is education. There also could be a role for prohibitions. Smartphones, for example, have been banned in some schools here in Fresno, California. Actually, it's not here. I'm in Northern California. That's in sort of South Central. Also in Los Angeles itself. Last week, California Governor Gavin Newsom called for a statewide smartphone ban in California schools, recognizing that social media and smartphones are not the same thing. However, a school ban on smartphones effectively bans kids from using social media during school time. Let me just continue a little bit more before I switch it over to you, Jonathan. If you give me a little patience here. So clearly people disagree about the risks and benefits of various technologies. One might argue against these types of bans I just mentioned by claiming that these technologies are actually more beneficial than detrimental or dangerous. We know that these tools can help us stay connected. We can access the news, we can conduct business. And of course, these tools, on the other hand, provide instant access to cyberbullying, exploitation, scams, disinformation, and many other things. Is there some truth to the claim that smartphones and social media are not the problem? We're blaming the tools, but it's really how they're used. It's kind of like the argument in our country that guns aren't the problem, it's how people use them. Well, when it comes to social media, it can be relatively insidious. We do recognize that social media can be useful specifically for kids. It is how they often socialize, organize clubs and teams, and how they communicate with each other, and even with their own parents. And smartphones can be used successfully in education when used properly to access the appropriate information. So we're talking about various things, social media and bans. And so a ban we talked about could take away some of these useful tools, and even a ban only prevents access to social media during school time, not after school. So winding this up, I really do think it comes to education. Teenagers in our country, and I'm sure in yours, they must train and study and pass a driver's ed test to be able to get behind the wheel of an automobile. Even earlier, there's mandatory sex education in schools. Well, don't we think there should be actual training in schools and otherwise for kids in terms of the risks and how they can properly navigate this new social media world and how to use their smartphones? And they really need to know in advance about the potential for cyberbullying, peer pressure, the bandwagon effect, the power of misinformation, exploitive algorithms, etc. And also the possibility of social media and, well, really social media addiction. If we've watched The Social Dilemma, maybe you saw that on Netflix, but there are books about this too. There's a lot of social engineering that some would argue purposely causes one to be have an excessive habit
Yeah.
and need to get their dopamine hit to go to their phone to access social media. So that's a little bit for you to chew on, Jonathan. What do you have to say to me?
I think it's a real challenge. I think maybe about 10 years ago, I did a pilot project just on what you suggested, a voluntary driving test before kids were allowed to use social media. It was called Accidental Outlaw. It was funded by the Nominate Foundation, an internet-based charity over in the UK. And we got some really interesting results from some pilot projects that we did. And I think you can improve the behavior of kids and teenagers by education. I speak to you about 4 hours after Keir Starmer became the new prime minister. I think it's certainly something that he looked at when he was at the when he was director of public prosecution. We had new guidelines, for example, for prosecutors on online abuse on his watch after the abuse of Tom Daley, the Olympic diver, and I'm sure that that's something. I'm not saying it's a 100-day priority, but that's something that the new government, I'm sure, will be looking at. I know that they're also looking at the right to disconnect in a corporate environment. So there's a perception that many employees, particularly those who work in Europe for US corporations, have their days extended by this requirement or this desire to be always on to answer emails from colleagues. In some parts of Europe, formal rights of disconnect are proposed and in some cases implemented, where you can't send emails to employees when they're on vacation or holiday, for example. You can't send it after certain hours. The Labour Party, now the Labour majority government with a significant majority, is looking at things like the right to disconnect. I think it'll be a more informal arrangement. It will be suggesting that employers and employers work out codes between them, so a sort of quasi-voluntary code initially. But I think in the corporate environment, that's interesting. And then I think one of the other things that's maybe worth touching on is how some corporations have been the victim recently of what you might call social media related scams as well. In the financial services community over here in the UK, the talk of the town is a case which sounds absolutely bizarre. If anybody wants the link, it's one of those few times I'd recommend you sit down and read the judgment, because there's some Python-esque comedy elements in it, but with really serious ramifications. This is an individual and some of his cohorts who started campaigns on Facebook and TikTok saying to people who are in financial difficulty, well, you can live mortgage-free, you can live debt-free, and you can use Magna Carta rights and rights from the Treaty of Ripon and other ancient statutes to live mortgage-free. And all you have to do is give me 1% of your debts up front with a minimum of 3,000 sterling. And then you have to pay court fees, possibly pay legal costs, etc., etc. He got more than 200 people to sign up. We don't know the exact number. We know that the courts have seen 200 who've actually paid their court fee money and showed up at the court with it. And needless to say, there was no truth in this. But a lot of financial institutions have gone to significant expense, I mean, big expense, defending high court proceedings against that they're a sort of offshoot of the freemen of the land movement, who believe that they're citizens with all sorts of strange rights which relate to Magna Carta and the right to name yourself as a ship under Admiralty law, etc., etc. And all of this sounds somewhat incredible, but I think one of the dangers of social media is Facebook has these bubbles, often aligned to strange political parties, which again we've seen lots of in the last couple of days here. that have these, that sell these dreams, and they prey on not only victims but also corporations. So corporations have to jump in early to get rid of these claims and monitor their presence and look out for these things. Otherwise, they run away with themselves. So I think you're right to highlight social media being dangerous in all sorts of ways. And I guess for corporations, it's vigilance and it's training. And for parents, it's probably the same as well, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, obviously, as you point out, the problem, I started talking about the children, trying to
Yeah,
protect children, but it comes up in so many contexts, like you just mentioned. I'll just say a couple more things just in the interest of
yeah,
time. In terms of self-monitoring, or parents for children, but even for we adults, on our own devices, some devices anyway, we can actually put time limits on how much we can be on a certain social media page. For example, you will only be allowed to be on Instagram so many minutes a day, and then you're timed out. That's it. So if we can't control ourselves, maybe we can have our technology by our own direction help us. I'll lastly point out that I am in the San Francisco office of Dwayne Moritz, hence the Golden Gate Bridge right behind me. I did take that picture recently. There we go.
fantastic. So I guess all that remains is to thank people for watching or listening. If you've got any views on this topic, then contact us via social media. And, and you can do that on LinkedIn, or you can find both of us on you're still on Facebook. I'm on Twitter, which I refuse to call X, but do connect with us. Let us know your thoughts, and we'll put the contact details on the YouTube version of the site, and in the LinkedIn group, just search TechLaw10 in LinkedIn groups. And I guess all that remains is for us to give our email addresses and say goodbye to the nice people. I'm jonathan.armstrong@puntersouthall.law.
I am, excuse me, ejsinrod@dwaynemorris.com. Jonathan, I hope you're watching Wimbledon. It's going strong right now.
I am. I was sad to see Andy Murray out last night, but there's still quite a lot of interest here. And I don't know how she's done today, but I did see Emma Raducanu at a tournament a couple of weeks ago, and she looks like she's returning to the form that brought her success a couple of years ago. So, yeah, tennis is on my horizon. Thanks for asking, Eric.
Good. Well, cheers. Nice to see you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we'll be seeing you soon, and keep sending us topic ideas.
Take care. Speak soon. Bye now.